Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening for Trinity College's Margaret MacMillan Lecture in International Relations. My name is Michael Kessler. I am a professor here at Trinity, where I hold the Raymond Pike Chair, which in turn provides me with the great privilege of being the director of the Margaret MacMillan Trinity I program. I also teach in the Ethics, Society, and Law program, a wonderful program here at Trinity College. So it's my pleasure to be here with all of you this evening. This is your token reminder to silence your cell phone if you have not done so already. All right. We acknowledge the land on which Trinity College and the University of Toronto operate as part of the traditional territories of the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River, and Anishinaabe people, land covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant. We acknowledge the stewardship of this land by First Nations, the continuing presence here of Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and the harm caused by colonialism. We commit ourselves to seeking a new and honorable relationship with the First Peoples of this land. Since the inception of the Margaret MacMillan Lecture in International Relations, we have been fortunate to host some of the most incredible thinkers and practitioners of our time, and this evening is no exception, as we welcome Catherine McKenna to Trinity. Following Catherine's lecture, we will have time for a short Q&A session, which will be moderated by Provost and Vice Chancellor of Trinity College, Mayo Moran. It's now my pleasure to tell you a little bit about our incredible guest this evening. Catherine McKenna is Canada's former Minister of Environment and Climate Change, as well as Minister of Infrastructure. She is the CEO of Climate and Nature Solutions, an advisory firm focused on scaling action and financing to tackle the climate crisis. She chaired the UN Secretary General's high-level expert group on net zero, setting out criteria for net zero commitments of businesses, financial institutions, cities, and regions. She is a distinguished visiting fellow at Columbia University and launched Women Leading on Climate. As Canada's former Minister of Environment and Climate Change, she was a lead negotiator of the Paris Agreement, Article 6 on carbon markets. She successfully negotiated Canada's first comprehensive climate change plan, including a coal phase-out and a price on carbon across Canada, a policy successfully upheld at the Supreme Court. She brought in Canada's new Impact Assessment Act for the review of major projects, led efforts to ban single-use plastics, and doubled the amount of nature protected in Canada in partnership with Indigenous peoples. Internationally, she helped establish the Powering Past Coal Coalition and the Nature Champions Summit. As Minister of Infrastructure and Communities, she led Canada's historic investment in public transit and green infrastructure, leveraged private sector investment in sustainable infrastructure through the Canada Infrastructure Bank, and launched Canada's first national infrastructure assessment to drive to net zero emissions by 2050. I don't know Catherine very well, but we got to spend an hour with some pretty amazing Trinity students a couple of hours ago in this very room. It was set up for a much more intimate audience, and I think you're in for an amazing talk tonight. I have a little bit of a blurb here on my sheet about who she is as a person, but I think rather than me telling you about that, I'm going to let her tell her own story to you. We are incredibly grateful, incredibly honored to have her here with us tonight. Please join me in welcoming Catherine McKenna.
All righty. Well, it's great to be here. I'm originally from St. Mike, so it's very rare we get invited to fancy places like Trinity. So thank you for welcoming me. I also want to recognize the traditional territory that we're on, the territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. And I remember talking to Perry Bellegarde, the former chief of the Assembly of First Nations, and I said, we do these recognitions of territory, but it's more than that. And he said, you should tell people. This was actually when I was leaving politics, so I wanted to say something meaningful. He said, we've got a big mountain to climb, so get to it. I'm obviously very thrilled to be here, so thank you very much to the Provost and the Chancellor, Mayo Moran. Thanks to everyone here at Trinity College. And obviously it's a huge it's a huge honor to be able to give the Margaret MacMillan Lecture. So I was thinking, okay, what do Margaret and I have in common? Well, MacMillan, McKenna. So that was a lot. She says history belongs to everyone, I believe. Politics belongs to everyone. And she talked about Paris 1919. I'm going to talk about Paris 2015. That's really as far as it goes. All right. So we'll start. And just so you may be wondering who I'm talking to. I'm talking to the young people. I'm talking to everyone, actually. We have lots of very important people here. We have the former Lieutenant Governor of Ontario, Liz Dowdeswell, who is amazing. We have Bob Bothwell, who is my prof. We have lots of other eminent people here, but we also have young people. And we have to inspire everyone, but we actually have to inspire and give hope to everyone. So if you're like, why is she talking about this? It's because I'm talking maybe to the youth too. Okay, one. There I am. So you asked where my story started. Well, here I am in Paris. This is 2015. I'd actually been a minister for 3 days. I didn't know what a COP was, so I had to ask my deputy minister. I was like, there are no dumb questions, right? Like COP is like Conference of the Parties. So I was like, one, that's not very explanatory, and two, no acronyms. But there I am, and I was super honored. Like, what could be more exciting than being the Minister of Environment and the first Minister of Climate Change for Canada here behind the podium? So what a start to a story. But that's not the start. And this is what I want young people to know. You just heard my CV. It sounds like it was all planned out. I had this big plan to end up here as Minister of Environment and Climate Change and now recovering politician. But no, there's a story behind it. And I think it's important because I want you to feel like you could be in my shoes. And I want you to know that everyone has a story, and this is mine. Because if we're going to talk about where change comes from, this is where it starts. Well, here we are, the McKenna kids. My mom is horrified. Actually, I think my sister and I are horrified because we have bowl cuts. But there we are, the four McKennas. We're a pretty tight family. I was a bossy older sister, obviously. There's my mom, long-suffering, the heart of the family, keeping everyone together. She is from Val-d'Or, Quebec, an Anglophone, really the heart of the family. My dad, very sadly, he passed away last year. Both my mom and dad were graduates of the University of Toronto, but he was also an immigrant. He was from Ireland, and like many immigrants, he felt so lucky to come to Canada. And he believed in things. He believed in Canada as a bilingual country. He believed in multiculturalism, and he believed that we needed to care for others. And he really instilled that in me. He's also a swimmer and a rugby player. You can probably tell by the nose. I'm Irish. That's also important to know about me. That's my grandfather. He fought for Irish independence. A lot of people thought that could never happen. Well, let me tell you, some days when it was kind of bleak, and I was like, man, politics is so hard. Can we actually tackle climate change? Thought about him. And I thought how people didn't always believe, but he believed. And they were able to do big things. And Irish are kind of fighters, so I'm a bit of a fighter. Hit the hammer, Hamilton. I know everyone here from Toronto, you wish you bought property. Sorry, you're too late. There you can see, yes, that's Stelco and DeFasco, and we're pretty proud of it. We're from the steel town. And you know what? We're eventually going to get rid of those stacks because investments are being made to clean up, to green steel, which is going to be a huge competitive advantage for Canada. But what I learned being from Hamilton is you can't be fancy. And I think that's super important in politics because people in Hamilton, they don't like fancy people. That your friends and neighbors and family are as fancy as anyone else. So when I was a kid, everyone's like, did you want to be a politician when you grew up? I was like, no, I wanted to go to the Olympics. So I don't know, this was on my wall. This is literally, I think I'm a pack rat. Everything I've ever owned, I still have. So I don't know if anyone remembers this. What Olympics? Quiz. 1984 Olympics, Canada was awesome. So that's Victor Davis. Sadly, he died not so long afterwards. But you got Mark Tewksbury, Tom Ponting, and in the water was My God, I don't have swimmers. Alex Bowman! It was amazing. We won golds. We were awesome. Canada was out there. That's what I wanted to do. I didn't want to be a politician. I look like a swimmer. There, I came to U of T. You might think it's all about fancy stuff. I came to U of T because we had the best swim team in the country. We won nationals. I was very excited to be captain of the swim team, and we were a great team. Lots of what I learned about politics and how to be successful, I learned in the pool. But good news, I also learned from profs. I did go to class. Oh, there's someone here, Bob Bothwell. We had Tom Delwith, unfortunately passed away, our former ambassador. John Curtin, G7 working group. Any students, you should join that. I got to go, oh yeah, we're like, woohoo. I got to go to the G7 meeting in Lyon as a journalist. And then Janice Stein. But then I was like, okay, enough school. I got to go see the world, find myself. So then I went, and Steve is not here, although some people, my old friends from U of T, we did a documentary. We did a bunch of things, but we did a documentary. It was supposed to be a Komodo dragons, but we could only go to Komodo Island in Indonesia for a day. So we did 60 days in Indonesia, a backpacking odyssey. But it was great, because you know what I realized? When you leave Canada, people outside of Canada don't spend every day thinking about Canada. In fact, sometimes they never think about Canada, and that's actually a good reminder to Canada, because we do a lot of fighting sometimes inside. Actually, we should be out there, actually doing real things and spending less time fighting internally. I wish, but then I went to London, but it was good times in London. It was New Labour, New Britain, LSE. I was at LSE. The next year, we got Tony Blair, and it was a relief, I think, for lots of people. But I saw what positive politics could be. A new, young Tony Blair coming in with a new progressive agenda that sounded so different, get rid of the Thatcher era. It was really, really awesome. And then I went to McGill Law. So I did do a lot of school. And McGill, it was interesting because it was post-referendum. So constitutional law class, you can imagine, we had on the one side my good friends who were francophones, and they were the separatists. And the other side, not all of them, but many of them, on the other side we had folks who had literally organized the rallies to say no. But I also studied human rights law, trade law, international law. It was awesome. But then once again, I was like, the real world. So this story had a huge impact on me. I went to Indonesia with my partner at the time, and it was right after Suharto fell. So President Suharto had fallen. Actually, there was an Indonesian student today who we were talking about this, and it was chaos. And these are young people fighting for democracy. I was at one event, it just went pear-shaped, and the police and the military actually had live bullets, we didn't know that, and they killed students. Those students died in front of us. I realized that is what fighting for democracy looks like. Then I worked for the UN. I wasn't ready to come home. I worked as a lawyer, so I should say I was doing actually corporate law, and I proved that anyone can get a job anywhere because it was the height of the economic crisis, and I'd written my New York bar, and I didn't know if I'd passed, but I just hustled. I was like, I'll be great. And they're like, okay, I don't know, some weird Canadian girl, but we'll give her a shot. Then I ended up working for the UN in East Timor. East Timorese voted for independence. Sadly, all hell broke loose. It was terrible. UN peacekeeping mission came, and I worked on, there's me, working for the UN in East Timor, and I worked on renegotiating the Timor Gap Treaty, a treaty governing maritime boundaries, offshore petroleum development, but very important to East Timor's future, working with amazing East Timorese. It's me with my little old school laptop, and what am I wearing? Sony Walkman. I feel like it's anyone my age. I'm old, but I don't know. Okay. Then I came back to Canada and I became very serious. So I was a competition and trade lawyer, which is quite good because we have a lot of monopolies and oligopolies in Canada, so don't worry, I'm on it. But it was kind of boring, to be honest. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not entirely sure this is like maybe good money, but I'm not really that into this. And then something happened where I reevaluated what I was going to do. I had a baby, and then I had another baby, and then I had another baby, and then I was like, what am I doing with my life? If I have so little time, it has to be meaningful. And that's when I decided I was going to get into corporate law. I couldn't get out right away, but on the side, with my friend Yasmin Shaker, who unfortunately isn't here, She and I started a charity called Canadian Lawyers Abroad. We just started it. We just started a website. So you two young people, probably don't get a Twitter account, get like an Instagram account, and then you'll be like a charity, you got to register. But you get going, you're to the races. And it was great. It was called Canadian Lawyers Abroad, and I was still at a law firm, Steichman's, and I was working with former Chief Justice Antonio Lemaire, and he said something to me. He said, why do you care so much about what's going on in the world and not what's happening here in Canada with Indigenous peoples? He'd worked on the Delgama case. He was on the Supreme Court. And so that really struck me. But the problem is I had no idea. Like many of us were I didn't know what Indigenous versus Aboriginal versus Métis First Nations. I literally knew nothing. And so, I went on my journey, which was go talk to Indigenous peoples, which even though I was from Hamilton, we have a residential school not very far outside. I didn't know a lot. But we ended up working with Chief Harry Laforme. He's an Indigenous judge with Indigenous lawyers, Indigenous law students, and we did a program called Dare to Dream, because I realized we had been told, what could we do usefully, and we needed young Indigenous kids to dream about being a lawyer or a court worker or a judge, but not just dream that their parents, went to jail or they were taken away from them. And so here we are, kids, First Nation school in Toronto. It was awesome. Then Janice Stein got to me. She's like, you got to come to the monk school and teach. I was like, I got 3 children. I'm running a charity. I'm like, okay, I will come and teach at the monk school every week. So I flew in, and it was awesome. And I met students like you. And the students here are so bright and hardworking and trying to solve global challenges in a real way, not just an academic way. How do we do it? It really, really inspired me. And I realized, just if you can stand more time with young people, that is what can keep you inspired, including and especially in climate. Then, I'll be honest, I really didn't like the government. And I was like, okay, I'm running a charity. It's human rights, rule of law, Indigenous issues, and the government is going in the complete wrong direction. So I decided it was time to step up. That politics actually matters. It was pretty bonkers. My riding was very hard to win. It had been an NDP riding, and actually we should all give thanks to Ed Broadbent, because he had been the MP in my riding, but he was an amazing political leader who understood the importance of politics, how it's about improving lives for people and working across party lines. Anyway, but I was like, okay, but we still need to win every riding. So we had Paul Dewar. He was great. I really liked Paul Dewar, but we needed to win every riding. So for 2.5 years, through many, many, many running shoes, through many doors, twice our riding, 100,000 doors, we won. We got the highest voter turnout in the country. And then that's what happens. You go in and you get called to this very weird meeting. You don't know what's going on. The prime minister comes and he's like, do you want to be in my cabinet as the first ever minister of environment and climate change? I was like, whoa, yes, but whoa. He's like, you're going to a COP in 3 days. And I was like, what's a COP again? So that's where we got. That is my story to how I got there. But this is for the young people, because I want you to think every time you see someone who seems kind of fancy up here, they're not that fancy. They started somewhere. And you can do it too. But just make good choices. And sometimes you're going to be doing crappy jobs. And sometimes you've got sick parents, or you've got a partner, you got to go somewhere else. Or sometimes you're having kids and you want to take a break. It's all fine. But you can still do pretty awesome things, because it was pretty amazing to be in the role I was in. Okay, 2. Let's talk about what I learned about politics. Now, I really could do a very long time on this, and if you were on my Twitter today, you kind of got a prelude, don't go to Twitter, but I did write some things about some stuff like carbon pricing. So one of the first things I learned, do the big things that matter. If you get elected, why are you getting elected? You're not getting elected to be a politician, you're getting elected to improve lives for people. And so, especially if you're in a majority, especially right away. Do everything you can, but do the big, meaningful things. And I think what happens is that people get lost. They're like, well, we did these things. We should just tell people about the things we did. And no, just go do big things. And so here, we did a big thing, carbon pricing. We wanted the Supreme Court, woohoo, but we're still fighting carbon pricing. Sometimes I think with my own party, but it wasn't just carbon pricing. Like, I'm proud of a lot of things we did on climate change. I'm proud that we did coal phase out. I'm proud that we doubled the amount of nature protected in partnership and led by Indigenous peoples. I'm proud that we make historic investments in public transit. I'm sorry about the mess with the Ontario line, but we need public transit, folks. But I'm also proud that we brought in the Canada Child Benefit and we raised 40,000 children out of poverty. I think I got that number. Maybe it's 300. 40%. It's 300,000. That's good. It's 300,000. 40% of children in poverty, we raised them out with the Canada Child Benefit. Brought 40,000 refugees from Syria. We reformed the Senate. Like, who could have thought that would happen? We legalized marijuana, brought medical assistance in dying. A whole range of things. A gender-balanced cabinet. You may think that doesn't matter. When I go talk to people, to women ministers in Japan, where they're like 1 or 2, they're like, gosh, I wish we'd just do that, and then the debate would be over. So we did things, and that is the one thing I learned about politics. Do the big things. You are lucky to be in government. You got elected on an agenda. Now, that doesn't mean you don't listen to people, and that doesn't mean you don't talk to people, and I will go through these other things, but you got in politics to do things, so go do them. 2, my good friend Jean Chrétien, my mentor. What did he say to me? The best advice I have ever gotten into politics. And he kind of said it like this. Les Canadiens sont raisonnables, Catherine, soyez raisonnable. So he was like, okay, here we go again. What are they doing? So he's awesome. He just celebrated his 3016 90th anniversary. So 30 years since he was prime minister, 60 years since he was elected a member of parliament, and 90 years old. And he was on fire because it was at his birthday party. He was great. But it was a lesson that I always remembered because it's hard in politics. Like, I didn't get files in my desk that were really easy. Oh, go do easy things. No, it's like, this is a disaster. How are you going to do it? And sometimes it was hard. And I always kept that in mind. Take carbon pricing. Like, I was like, okay, how are we going to do this? This is going to be really hard. And when we looked at the policy, I was like, give the money back so more people are better off while the policy is still good for the planet. Those are things like, you gotta be reasonable. That doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean it's easy to sell, but you gotta be reasonable. Very, very important lesson, probably a good lesson in life. So sometimes you need to fight. We're all very Canadian. I know we don't like fighting, many of us. I'm sorry, like, that's just not a thing if you're working on climate change. And I mean it not that I liked fighting, because let's take carbon pricing, for example. I was like, okay, we're gonna be really smart about this policy. It's a small c conservative policy. It's using a market mechanism. It's using a price, so people will make choices. They have decisions. They can have more money back and then choose to invest in cleaner solutions. I was like, literally, it's a conservative policy. We're gonna do the most conservative way ever. And who said you need to give all the money back? George Shultz. So many of you remember George Shultz. He was head of the Bipartisan Climate Caucus in the US, and he and I had many conversations. I was like, that is very smart. He worked for Ronald Reagan. He's a conservative. Then Brian Mulroney was like, yes, totally, we need to do this. We did this when we were working on acid rain. You've got to put a price on pollution. Industry will complain, but then they will step up and they'll do it. And then I got Jean Charest. Jean Charest done cap and trade system in Quebec. I got Gordon Campbell, done it in BC, showed it worked. I got like everyone. I got Arnold Schwarzenegger because I met him once. I was like, hi, Arnie. I'm doing this thing called carbon pricing. Will you help us out, please? Will you do a video that talks about fighting, terminating pollution or something? So you can go see the video. I did tweet it again today because look, he did a video for me. I was like, I don't care. I need anyone, and I need people who can talk to different audiences. And gosh, conservatives will just agree, obviously, because it's a smart policy. Give the money back. It's transparent. I had to fight internally. People want to do green things. I was like, we're not doing green things. We're going to put a price on pollution, give the money back. That is green. Like, that is what we're going to do. And by the way, it's progressive because people who have the least amount of money will get the most money back because they have the lowest carbon footprint. Anyway, but it didn't really work. Well, not everyone agreed with me. I was like, oh, okay. You conservative politicians, you call yourself conservatives. Not progressive conservatives, mind you, but I had to fight. And I didn't want to fight. I really didn't want to fight, but I had to fight. I spent a lot of time now fighting oil and gas. Why? Because oil and gas, and this is important, just you tell your friends, Oil and gas companies are making massive historic record profits. More profits than they've ever made, not because they're geniuses, because we got an illegal war with Russia. What do they do with those profits? They give those profits back to their shareholders. Where are most of their shareholders? Not in Canada. They also do massive executive compensation, more than anyone in this room, maybe, I don't know who you are, but will make in a few years. A few decades. And so then what do? They come in to government, knock, 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 everyone opens their door, and then they demand subsidies, demand your money to go clean up their pollution. And then they pay you, when you pay your heating bill, your heating oil or gas bill, it's not the price of the pollution that's the problem, it's the price charged by oil and gas companies, and they are making massive profits. They're not giving you a break. And what are they? They're the cause of the climate crisis. So I'm sorry, sometimes you have to call things out, and it doesn't feel that comfortable. I didn't like being fighting every day. I am from Hamilton. I am a competitive swimmer. My grandfather fought for Irish independence. I can fight. I didn't want to do it, but you have to sometimes fight, even if you don't want to, because it's too important. But you fight for Canadians, because Canadians want climate action, and yes, they want affordability. And yes, they want to have a roof over their heads. Those are all good things, and we can do all those things. But you're going to have to fight sometimes, especially entrenched interests, especially people that will tell you fibs. Speaking of which, the resistance. Okay, so yeah, these are the people I had to fight. Oh yes, I had to fight those people. And they did stickers. You may remember the stickers. They were particularly bad stickers. They fell off the pumps, but they were stickers like, oh, it's going to cost you so much. I was like, oh, you missed the part where we give all the money back. It was really hard, but the good news is I realized that there's a resistance to the resistance. And by the way, that doesn't look particularly representative of Canadians, I'm just gonna say. But the thing is, I realized that we had so many people, when we were fighting at the Supreme Court, I was like, oh, we're gonna have our own resistance. So of course we had environmentalists. We had young people, Generation Squeeze, who were like, we're being squeezed by climate change. We're gonna pay the price because you guys haven't done things. We had Indigenous leaders. We had doctors who were making, climate change is also a health issue. We had economists because carbon pricing makes economic sense. We had so many other people on our side. And I think that's really important because the noise out here can make it seem like, oh my gosh, these people are just idealists or radicals. No, actually, we're not doing enough on the science, but we have to at least fight for the smart things that we have to do, and then we need to do more. Okay, the thing is the thing, and the thing is climate change. Yes, that my staff, I actually have Claire on my team, but one of my staff members got me this when I left, because I said it all the time. But what do I mean by that? Is yes, climate change is an environmental issue. It's also a health issue. Remember when the heat dome was over Lytton? Sometimes we forget how many people died in Vancouver because how hot it was. Seniors, people with respiratory illnesses, 600 people died. I mean, people are dying all over the world. It's a development issue. By the way, it's a national security issue, because what do you think's happening in our Arctic right now? We have all these subs, and we have Russians and Chinese trying to figure out faster routes and how they can go take more territory. We should invest more in our military, by the way, too. But it's also, it's a risk issue. It's a risk to our financial institutions if we don't actually figure out that the world is moving off fossil fuels and we're overinvested in oil sands. It is just a fact. It's also, it's a justice issue. It's a justice issue for Inuit who live in the Arctic and they will lose their homeland. It is an everything thing. Give me anything, I can tell you why it's a thing. It's also a huge economic opportunity. We're in a race, by the way. We're in a race with the US. The US has made massive, huge investments through the Inflation Reduction Act. China, Europe. We've got to race and we've got to want to win. And that's why you need everyone. And I was the environment minister. Then I was infrastructure minister, happier, you got to spend more money. But it was especially post-COVID, we needed to create jobs. But it was hard. It was hard to get everyone on board because some people wouldn't necessarily be like, well, the cost of the transition. I was like, the cost of the transition, the cost of not transitioning. Finance, very important, but all the different portfolios, it is the thing. It is the thing. I know it's my thing, but it's a thing. Whatever you care about, especially if you care about your kids, it's the thing. Big business has too much power. Back to, I was a competition and trade lawyer. It's a real problem. So I'm not going to go into my whole oligopoly thing, if you wonder why you're paying so much money beyond the cost of oil and gas charged by oil and gas companies, we also have a lot of oligopolies in a lot of different sectors, telecoms, groceries. I mean, basically most of our sectors are banks. It's a problem. And I'm a liberal, small L liberal, who believes in liberal values. That's a problem. But it's also a problem this, lobbying. In a way, I was like, why do we even allow lobbying? Why don't we just have open meetings where people can just tell us what they really want, and then we can make decisions, because we're government, we should be able to take this in. So this is the Pathways Alliance. The Pathways Alliance represents the 6 largest oil sands companies. They were able to come in and have loads of meetings. You were like, how could 3 deputy ministers meet in one day? Aren't they running the country? Like, what about all these ministers and staff? And the reality is they are under investigation by the Competition Bureau for misleading Canadians, partly on the basis of our net zero report that I did for the UN Secretary General, where we just said, if you say you're net zero, you got to do this. Emissions need to come down, your money needs to go clean, you need to have a transition plan. They get access. You know who doesn't get access? Kids. You know what? Maybe we should do 1 for 1. Kids get to go in and they get to say what they think the government should do in climate action, as opposed to all these big business and lobbyists. This is a real problem because it has an impact on how government makes decisions. And it shouldn't be big businesses that are influencing our decisions. That should not. They can have a role. They can tell us if your policy is going to have a negative impact. But they shouldn't be there lobbying, especially oil and gas companies, who obviously are lobbying against climate action, not for climate action. Team Canada is the Canada we need. Remember, I love Team Canada. My swimmers, they were all Team Canada. This is Team Canada. This is Canada at its best. So this is at the Paris Agreement negotiations. Look at that. Have you ever seen a cross-partisan group of folks? Imagine premiers sitting with the prime minister, with me, conservative premiers. Christy Clark is a conservative. She may have been called a liberal, but she's not. And then you have here Ed Fast. You have here Philippe Couillard, a liberal. You have Kathleen Wynne. You have Rachel Notley, NDP. You have Tom Mulcair, NDP. Of course, you've got Elizabeth May. She's always Elizabeth May. I love Elizabeth May. And then you've got Perry Bellegarde representing Indigenous peoples. That's what Team Canada is at its best. We were there because we wanted action on climate change. We wanted to be a team, and we fought for it. And that gave me the mandate to go fight for Canada, to be there and fighting for 1.5 degrees, to be fighting for Article 6, so that's kind of a nerdy text, but it was the market text of the Paris Agreement, and to fight for ambition. So this is really important because I feel like when I was in international relations, so we've got Bob Bothwell here. We don't have John Curtin because we were always like, are we a major power or a middle power? And I was like, let's just be powerful. And so we can lead. And I think that's really important, but you have to be serious. You have to be practical. You have to focus on what our strengths are, and you have to focus on what our values are, of course, but also our interests. So an example of where Canada led, this is me. Okay, so we had the Trump election. That may happen. Get ready. We weren't ready. I was like, what? He is going to win? I remember I was with the US ambassador at a big room, and I got my phone was buzzing. I was with my daughter. My daughter's like tugging at me. I was like, I don't really know. It's not looking really good. And I was like, oh, it's fine. It's fine. And then my chief of staff, I look at my phone, and it was like, get out of there now. The cameras are on you, and you're looking nervous. So then we had Donald Trump. So that was a real problem, because remember, Paris Agreement 2015, Donald Trump gets elected in 2016, comes into power 2017. He's like, and we're going to get out of the Paris Agreement. So I was like, okay, think fast. Everyone was kind of crying at COP22. I was like, stop crying. We can't cry. We need to keep the momentum and the ambition. And so I was like, okay, what are we going to do? I hadn't even been minister all that long, but I was like, you know what? We're going to get the Chinese, we're going to get the European Union, we're going to get them, and we're going to do the Major Economies Forum was always run by the US, and they brought everyone together in advance of COPs to get climate ambition. I was like, we're going to do it. We're going to create the Minister on Climate Action. And I won't name the name, but it was a very, very senior American official, said, you can't do that, Canada, because the US always does the Major Economies Forum. And I was like, oh, that's really funny. Did you have a change in presidents? Like, no. Okay, well, we're going to go do this. So we did this. It's still there. The Ministry of Climate Action meets every single year. Canada hosted the first one, then China, then the EU. And yes, it is very difficult with China. The relationship is very difficult with China. But we better be working together on climate because they are the largest emitter and the second largest economy. And you need a narrative. We needed momentum, but we actually needed real action. And that was Canada. Canada did that, and people recognized our role. And we can do things in the world. We can do things, but you can't just say things. You have to do things. Like, you have to be very serious, play to your strengths. Misinformation is undermining everything. Of course, that's true on climate. You can go on my Twitter right now. I don't let people comment who don't follow me. That was like an amazing revolution when I realized you could do that. But I mean, climate denial is rampant, rampant. All over, and it's really problematic because we're actually seeing a drop in folks who believe that climate change is man-made. That's obviously really, really bad. But misinformation obviously goes way beyond that, and I'm very worried about democracy. Because, by the way, if we don't keep democracy, we don't get climate action. Right? So we have to deal with that, and we can deal with that. By the way, the government's been talking a long time about an online harm bill. It has been talking a long time by regulating social media companies. Just do it. I don't think there are any Canadians, there are very few Canadians who are like, oh, that's great, we should have more misinformation. We should have more hate towards people, women, LGBTQ+, marginalized communities, just general polarization. No, people don't like that, just do it. Misogyny sucks. Yeah, I know that's kind of obvious, but I thought I'd just put it in there. Yes, climate Barbie. That is actually a Barbie that was sent to me because people thought it was very, very funny to send me my office Barbies. They thought it was so funny. Oh my God, so funny. I was like, this isn't very funny. We'd give it to the Christmas drive. But it's funny because my mom would laugh because she never let me play with Barbies. I never wanted to play with Barbies, by the way. And I was like, I'm not a Barbie. But it was annoying. I did learn something important though. By the way, like, I also learned Barbie's very cool. My kids are like, she's cool, see Barbie movie. And I was like, well, America Ferrera was definitely awesome. I'm not like, but I guess you had to see the movie. It's a good movie, so you could see Barbie movie. But it was interesting because I realized you got to call things out sometimes. I was just like a person working on climate change. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll take on being a woman now too. I'll just like take on changing, like tackling climate change and then having to fight to like be recognized as a smart person working on climate change. And so I called it out, and I think that was good. I didn't call it out all the time. Like, actually, there was a lot of hate online, and then it went offline and it became security issues. So that's obviously a real problem. But when I called it out, Canadians mostly, they didn't care, like across political spectrum, they didn't like it. They did not like it. And I think we have to do that every once in a while to remind Canadians that it's not okay sometimes what happens in politics, and we need to call it out. And I want everyone to know I did not leave politics because of the hate. I feel like that's really important, especially for women, folks of different diverse genders, anyone, men, I don't care. You want to get into politics, it's still a good place to go, but we need to actually do a lot better in terms of how we protect politicians. We need to go over after social media companies who amplify hate. That is their business model. We need to go after fake news, rage-hating, mongering outlets. That all has to happen because who's going to want to go in? But you can call it out too, and I will be there. Anyone wants to run, any women, girls thinking about politics, I will help you. I will help you, because it's hard out there, and I was very fortunate to be supported. Reconciliation requires action. Now that seems like an obvious thing to say, but I feel like sometimes my Indigenous friends are like, could you guys stop saying things and actually do things? Like, we need jobs, we want investments in our communities, we want housing, and a lot has been done. I don't want to diminish it. And back to Perry Bellegarde, it's a mountain. We got to climb it. It's very hard. I mean, one thing, and it's like, I'm not amazing, right? I tried, and there was a lot that wasn't done, but Indigenous people care and understand our land, our waters, often a lot better, our species, a lot better than we do. We protected massive areas in Canada led by Indigenous peoples. That's with Musa. Musa was awesome. So we're in Taliadotup-Amanga, which was we created the largest protected area with Inuit. And Musa was awesome. He had started making kayaks. Did you know that many Inuit have never been on the water? Even though kayaks, you always think of kayaks It's an Inuit word, but they lost going on the water. A lot of that has to do with actually the legacy of environmental groups, and we won't go into that, but attacking the seal trade, and that had a really huge impacts. But this is what reconciliation looks like. It looks like hanging out with people who are very different from you. It looks like listening to them, but it also looks like listening to what they want. They wanted to protect this area. They didn't want to develop, but they also wanted investments in jobs. Swimming prepared me for politics. I had to put in swimming, you knew it. But there I am. Now, we had a swim team on Thursdays. I felt like I was kind of the captain of the swim team again. And Thursdays, we go to the Chateau Laurier pool. So yes, I guess we were the fancy swim team of parliamentarians. It's kind of funny because Elizabeth May is there, and she learned to swim in politics, which was very unusual. But she would come, and it would be like 6:30 in the morning, and Liz would come, and she'd be like, so Catherine, why aren't you? And then I'd have to go underwater because I was like, I came here to swim, Elizabeth, But we did this across party lines. And so one thing I learned in politics is we're all supposed to be in politics. We're parliamentarians. We're there to get things done. And we have to have relationships. Joe Clark has talked about this. Lots of folks at Broadman spoke about this, how it used to be, where we actually used to talk to people. And you had vigorous debate, but you could hang out with them and actually find solutions that were in the interest of Canadians, not of your political party. And I think that was really important. I also learned hard things are hard. You have to have you can have a long-term goal. 1.5 degrees is a stretch goal. But remember, I wanted to go to the Olympics. I went to Olympic trials, I make it to Olympics, but I wasn't going to make it if I was doing the same time I was doing when I was 12. And so you have to set short-term goals, and you got to work really hard every single day. That's what politics really is. I mean, you got to do a bunch of other things, but that actually was the discipline of the pool, and being focused on the goal was actually super helpful. There is life after politics. I know. Everyone I left politics are like, how could you leave politics? Don't you care about climate change? I was like, no, I'm leaving politics to work on climate change. What? There's me. I look quite zen. I actually just made the decision. I turned 50. It was COVID. My kids were once again back home. Thank you, Doug Ford. I was like, what? No, not home again. And I just thought, what's important? And for me, it was my kids. I wanted to spend more time. They were going to go off to university in not that long. And I'd been in politics, and it's very hard for your kids. You're away a lot. But also, I just wanted to focus on climate. And so I did something that was a little bit bonkers. I'm also a middle-class kid, so I had to give up my pension. But I thought about it long and hard, and I was like, I just don't want to be here anymore. I want to go work globally on climate because I think it's so important. I think there's something I can do globally. And by the way, in Canada, someone's going to have to wrestle politically with oil and gas. So I decided to leave. And people can do that. You can leave politics. It's A-okay. There are other people out there, but also we need new people. We need new ideas, and people get tired. Okay, here, now, climate. Okay. This is the last section. I'm now probably way over time. I'm okay, I'm on time. Thanks, Pete. My partner is pretty good on keeping me. So to the life after politics, well, I did not know what I was going to do. I incorporated. I was going to do work. I was going to make money. But I was going to work with people I wanted to work with who were doing real things, scaling climate action. But then I was asked by the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, a person I really admire. He's got the hardest job in the world. He really does. Because his role is to bring everyone in the world together. And we have intractable geopolitical issues, but we need the UN. Where else are you gonna? I know it's imperfect. I worked for it. I know it's imperfect, but he is the person who calls it out on climate because he tells me, he represents not just countries, but people, including the poorest people who have no voice. And he asked me, he said, Catherine, would you be the chair of a really very long-winded name, but essentially a group of experts that worked on tackling greenwashing, essentially, setting out clear criteria for financial institutions like banks, insurance companies, asset managers, owners, corporates, companies, and cities and regions for what real net zero means. And I'll get into that, but there's a fact-free. We're living a bit fact-free. Everyone's net zero. I was like, no, you're not. So that's what I got to do. We set out the criteria, and it's been really amazing working with him because I really think climate change is a global issue. We have to figure it out. It's very hard, and it can't just be Canada gets to be the #1 fossil fuel exporter, and then poor countries are feeling the impacts of climate change, and then we tell them, sorry, you can't go develop your fossil fuels. We're going to have to do a lot better in Canada, but globally, and that's the message he is constantly out there saying. Okay, does anyone know what this is? What does it look like? It's the hockey stick curve. You can see it looks like a hockey stick. That is rising temperatures. I put this here because I don't want you to think I'm telling you this lovely story, because it's not that lovely. It's hard. It's hard. That's 1.5 degrees. We're pretty close to 1.5 degrees. Remember I said, like Paris, we all came together, we wanted to limit warming to 1.5 degrees, and it just keeps on going up and up and up. So folks, we have a lot of work to do. And anytime anyone says 2050 for you, you say, what are you doing for 2030? Because we have to half emissions by 2030. Half global emissions. That's very hard. That's a lot of emissions. We got to do the work. Okay, this is fires across the country. Remember that? Remember the summer of wildfires? Remember when you couldn't go outside? When I'd be talking to my friends in New York, they're like, wow, your greatest export is terrible air quality. That we had to evacuate a capital. That actually 3 times our emissions came out of this than we produced in a single year, which we're probably not even counting. It was really bad out there. That our boreal is a sink, or used to be, and now it's actually contributing and accelerating climate change. And this is the thing that is, in a way, terrible, but also positive, because it's in everyone's face, including here. We all see it. This is not normal. And if you haven't read it, there's a really great book, Fire Weather. It's worth reading, because it's kind of petrifying, but it's also like, just what are we unleashing? Okay, but then there's the good story, and this is why we will eventually win on climate. Will we do it fast enough? I don't know. But this just shows GDP in Canada by 2050 and the number of clean energy jobs transition to net zero. It is amazing. There's a huge economic case for this. And by the way, if we don't do the work, as I said, all jobs, investment are going to go to the US. They're going to go to China. They're going to go to the EU. So we need to figure it out. And that's a great case, because yes, we will lose some jobs in oil and gas, and we've got to be very concerned about those workers and communities. But it's not about oil and gas companies. By the way, they make massive profits. You want me to do my little thing? Massive profits. They give it back to shareholders. They demand subsidies. They charge you more. That we have to care about workers and communities, but there's going to be more jobs. And I speak to plumbers and pipe fitters associations, and they're not liberals. And they just say, like, I want a job. And there's a shortage right now of jobs in those professions. There's going to be an even greater shortage. We now need to train so many workers to fill these jobs. And every young person most young people, probably everyone that's here, wants to work in a job that somehow is related to climate change. And by the way, climate is the thing, so every job should have an aspect related to climate. The other thing that makes me optimistic is the Paris Agreement. We sometimes brush over it. We're like, oh, wow, Paris Agreement, whatever. That was a really big deal for the world. It was a really big deal. The first time ever the world came together to not only have a temperature target, below 2 degrees, striving for 1.5, but it also, every single country said they had to do their part. Sure, is it binding? No. Sure, is it clear exactly what everyone needs to do? No. But the world came together to do something very hard and to get an ambitious agreement. I'm very happy that was the French. They gave me an example. They gave me a copy of the gavel. And that was an amazing moment for democracy and multilateralism. And I don't think we can underplay successes. Sometimes we just want to move on. That was important. Okay, now there was the COP, the recent COP. So there's a lot to say. You probably read it was a disaster, science terrible. It was amazing. Okay, I don't even want to get into like what exactly it was. It was weird. Every COP's kind of weird. I mean, you're in like literally a petro state, which also, by the way, human rights is a massive issue, and sometimes we do not do enough to like human rights and climate and justice. But in the end, that picture, I put it on because it's kind of funny, because you may have heard I do women leading on climate, and it's not because women are half the population, it's because women are actually doing most of the work on climate. There's not one woman. That actually was disappeared from the internet. I'd like to think because I tweeted about it, but I was like, there must be a woman. Like, there are 10% of leaders are women, so like there's got to be a woman, but not one woman in the picture. So this was important. Like, look, there's a lot of takes on the COP, and there's a lot of takes, so there's a lot to be said. But finally, for the first time, we finally talked about fossil fuels and the need to transition away. We should have had phase out. We should have had linked only the things that actually really work, not like CCS and all these things that are sometimes delay tactics for oil and gas. Hard to decarbonize maybe. But we actually, were able to have a real conversation about the real thing. And the real thing is largely a fossil fuel climate crisis. It's just like the facts. And that we have to say, and then we have to act. So what do we need to do now? And this is the end. You'll be like, oh my gosh, so long, but I don't know, I had to cover a lot of ground here. So everyone was writing about like what happened to the COP. And so my Christmas holiday with my partner Pete, we actually helped write with Laurence Tubiana, forget what happened at COP. How do we move forward and make sure this is the end of the fossil fuel era? We're using something from the 19th and the 20th century. Let's get to the 21st century. It's going to be better. We didn't get out of stones. We didn't get out of the Stone Age because we ran out of stones. We can do this. And so how do we do this? So we set out in this an agenda to COP30, which is in 2 years. Here's the agenda. Okay, this is very nerdy. I apologize, but I'm like someone who's a policy wonk too, so it's important we know what we need to do. 1, we need to implement the International Energy Agency pathway by 2030. You're like, what is that? Oh, good news. It's not that complicated. We need to triple renewable energy by 2030. We can do that. Guess what? We have the solutions and they're cheaper. Of course, we're being fought by fossil fuel interests, but it's actually cheaper to do that. 2, we need to double energy efficiency. We are so inefficient. Like, I love this building, but I'm guessing it's very inefficient. I did hear the new building is going to be super duper efficient. That's great. It's going to create good jobs, opportunity for Canadian business, manufacturing. I was infrastructure minister. Awesome. Great. Keep on doing that. But like we drive these massive cars. We do all these things. We could be way better, including and especially in Canada. I know the country's cold. They're heat pumps. Heat pumps actually work. I know people may tell you they don't. They do. We also need to tackle methane from oil and gas. Methane is a really big problem because it is 80 times more polluting than CO2 in the short term. And it is like when people say LNG is great as a transition fuel, actually it's got a ton of, it's like methane. And so we got a huge problem. We can do that. We actually have the solutions. Great Canadian company, I'll do a plug. I do work for them, but GHGSat. You can go look them up. Satellite monitoring of methane. We now can tell where all the emissions are. We will come for you. You will be able to see, and we will say who's got the emissions. So we need to do that, and we need to electrify everything. And by the way, because you may have heard, some premiers are very mad because we're talking, well, first of all, we did have a premier who said, like, let's put a pause on renewables because we need to understand end of life. I was like, oh, maybe we should put a pause on the oil sands because we have like 200 billion or more in unpaid liabilities. Like, what? And so, and by the way, that's a Canada issue. When you think, once again, abroad, people don't think of Canada every day. When I go abroad, they're like, why did Canada put a pause on renewables? I was like, well, let me explain our federation and let me explain Alberta. They're like, what? We're not going to invest in Canada. We're going to invest in Canada. I was like, no, wrong answer. That is the wrong answer. So we can't do dumb things. But we also, what was I trying to say? Electrification. So you may have seen people like, oh my gosh, electrification is so hard. We're 80% clean electricity. We're like the world's leader. What are the world leaders? That is an amazing opportunity. Yes, Alberta, Saskatchewan, there are things to do, but Rachel Notley mapped out a path. Like, you can do it, you can be ambitious, and we can figure out, and that's a huge competitive advantage for us, but then we're fighting again. We're at our worst. We're fighting against like things that are actually, one, good for the planet, but also good for business. 2, we need to phase out fossil fuels. Well, the good news, because the COP, you often hear one side of the story. I think around 140 countries supported a phase out of fossil fuels. We had 200 of the leading businesses representing $1.5 trillion in revenues who said we need to phase out fossil fuels. We have the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance, actually led by Quebec, saying we need to phase out fossil fuels. There is huge momentum to phase out fossil fuels. We need to make it clear that that's what we're doing, and we need to figure out how there's a fair and equitable transition for communities, yes, but also for countries. And that is work that is ongoing, but we need to figure that out. Like, it can't just be we're going to phase out fossil fuels and magically happens. That's not what happens in climate. Got to map it out. 3, we massively scale up capital to invest in the clean transition. How much money do we need? We need like $1 trillion. It's or trillions. It's hugely expensive. But the good news is we actually have money. I spent a lot of time with the largest financial institutions in the world. They have money. They have money to invest, but we need to leverage it. We need to figure out how to get that money so that it's actually working, because there's just not enough money in government. I was the infrastructure minister. Like, there just isn't enough money. We could not invest, we could not invest in everything we needed to do, so we created the Canada Infrastructure Bank. When I was there, we reformed it. It's a financing mechanism to de-risk and leverage private capital. Very important. But we also need governments to step up and support the global south. Like, we're actually a major polluter. I know we don't want to talk about that, but we are. And we need to be supporting countries because we're actually like, as the fifth largest exporter of oil and gas, we're causing the climate crisis too. It's something we don't like to talk about because we talk about our targets in country. It's the emissions in our country. We're also exporting emissions, folks. And then we give very little money for countries that are absolutely getting slammed by climate change. But we also need new innovative solutions. So Laurence Tubiana, who's very smart, she's working on international taxation for who? Oil and gas. And also other heavy polluting sectors. They got to pay their fair part. We're not even talking about damages now. We're actually talking about actually investing in the future. 4, we need to bring accountability to net zero. That is what I am working on, as I said. And it's great because we now have folks, environmentalists, like Competition Bureau, using what are the real criteria, because you can measure it. Net zero, what does it mean? First of all, it's not about 2050, because if your emissions go up all the way to 2049, and then you're like, oh, actually, we're going to do something on climate change, you're going to blow through 1.5. You're going to be so far, we'll be at 4 degrees of warming. We need to reduce emissions now, reduce them by half by 2030. And to do that, we need folks to actually do the work. So you can't just say you're net zero or you're carbon neutral or all these other things that are advertised in the Globe and Mail, Pathways, Globe and Mail. You go on an airplane, you go to VIA, everywhere you look. I'm like listening to talk radio that my kids have left on, and there it's like, guess what? Pathways cares about the planet. I was like, what are we doing? It's like 6 a.m. I'm going to swim practice. Like, just not true. So we need to bring accountability. But there's also other initiatives. So I work with Mark Carney. Yes, he does a ton on climate. And Mike Bloomberg, President Macron they have a portal where they're just going to have all the companies and financial institutions, and they're going to show transition plan. Are your emissions going down? Is your money going to clean? They're just going to put it out because, yes, we need to regulate, and I think we're getting there. But in the interim, transparency. That will allow folks to make decisions. You can make decisions with your pensions. Do you want your pension to be investing in new fossil fuels? Young people, do you want to go work for a company that is a fossil fuel company or supporting fossil fuels? Consulting firms, law firms, there are obviously comms firms who are doing that. You can make decisions. So I think that is really important, and that's going to be critical if we get Donald Trump and the geopolitics is bad. We need business, financial institutions, cities, and regions to be leading the way, and many are, by the way. Not everyone is greenwashing. There are really great ones, and we need to promote them. And then we need to empower people. And people say, like, how can you every day work on this? It's so depressing. And I'm like, no, because I meet the best people. Like, I meet people that are working every day. Yes, young people marching in the streets. That matters. By the way, when you're in government, I was like, yeah, you go march in the street because it helps me at the cabinet table. When people are like, oh no, are they going to vote for us? I was like, well, it's not looking so good if we don't do more on climate. But it's also young people deciding with your purchasing power, or consumers deciding with purchasing power. It's citizens' assemblies. We need to do more of those. We need to bring citizens together and actually say, what do you think we should do? Because I bet you, if you brought a farmer from Alberta, an oil and gas worker, someone from downtown Toronto, someone from the Atlantic, and you had parameters around a discussion as opposed to fact-free, say, like, climate change is having an impact, it's costing us this now, it's going to cost us this in the future. It's like, and these are the things we could do. I bet you we would get so much further along. The Pope. I'm Catholic. Someone laughs sometimes, but the Pope and Laudato Si and green churches have been really focusing on how to talk about climate as a social justice issue. We need to foster that. Legal litigation. Climate litigation is amazing. By the way, California is leading the way. They're going to hold oil and gas responsible. And by the way, that will make everyone else very nervous because in the US, there's a lot of lawyers. So if you are working with oil and gas, you might want to think about tobacco and how that went because it's not going to be pretty. But all of these things really matter. And I think it's really important that we not feel like we can't do things. Of course, you should do everything you can, but we need to scale. Everything is scale. Climate and nature solutions, we work on scale. What is going to scale? So yes, you should do whatever you can, but some people can't afford to do a lot of things. And by the way, oil and gas is the problem. We have massive emissions. We can start by that, and we can get the action that we need. But it's about people coming together. And the last thing I'll end with is democracy. We need people, young people particularly, we need you to vote, but we need people to run. We need women. We need broader diversity in our politics. We need people to support political parties. We need people to recognize that without democracy, if you really care about climate action, you're getting no climate action without democracy. But by the way, democracy is super, super important. So if I could leave you with just like something that I hope you will do. One, you will support climate action. That you will think about it as an everything thing and talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends, talk to them about things they care about and tell them why climate is important then. Taking action on climate. If you care about jobs, if you care about our competitiveness, if you care about health, if you care about your kids, all of those are reasons to act on climate. Two, believe in politics. I know it's hard. I know many days I'm like, oh my gosh, why is this so bad? But it matters. We are so fortunate. We cannot take it for granted. I mean, the best thing I saw was actually in Germany, Germans marching in the streets against far-right parties that want to destroy democracy. We are going to have to fight. We're going, I think, into probably a dark era on democracy, and we're going to fight. And for the young people here, you can be in this. One day, you can be here. Because I don't know that I believed that when I was in politics. When I was sitting there, I was like, oh, these are very fancy people. Like, I don't know, I'm a swimmer. But, you know, you can end up here too. And that's what we always need to believe that it is possible. Better is possible, that good politics is possible, that you can do amazing things. And that is why I work on climate. And my 3 kids, because in the end, it's for your kids. But there I didn't really mean to get a bit emotional, but I just feel like if you're going to say things that matters. Thank you.
There we go. Wasn't that incredible? Yeah. Getting emotional makes a lot of sense in these circumstances, and I think it's wonderful to have you come and speak to us and speak to our students. Because these topics really, really matter. And I think in the world we live in, we feel their weightiness and we feel the fragility of many things that we've taken for granted. So thank you. And we do have time for a few questions. I know there will be many, many people who will want to ask questions. So don't go too far off the stage.
Okay, I wasn't sure what I was doing with it. Okay, I will come back.
So we'll do a couple questions and then we'll let you take a break. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was amazing. Question, Allison.
The future of leading the United States is not looking that great in Canada either. What do you fear might happen with the next election and climate change?
You know, like, look, who knows? But I mean, last time I was like, what just happened? What? We didn't expect this. So I think, like, let's not be fools. Like, I felt like I was a fool then. I think we just have to be prepared. I'm like, you know, just prepare for the worst, hope for the best. And that will mean on climate, I spend a lot of time thinking about this, talking to folks internationally, what are we going to do? Like, we created the Ministerial on Climate Action. In the US, We're All In was a movement of cities, regions, financial institutions, corporations that were like, we're still committed to climate action. So we're going to have to innovate. Like, the reality is we get so focused on nation states. I know I did do IR, but I mean, there's so many other players now, and I think we've got to leverage that a lot more. You know, look, it's bad if it's Donald Trump. And they've actually set out their platform. So there was a young woman who was working in Pruitt's office. He was the head of the EPA. And they just tried to take things down when they're slightly incompetent. They're not going to be incompetent next time. They've got like their agenda and their planning. So, you know, I talked to my American friends that are in the administration, like they're trying to do everything they can, make things robust. But we're gonna have to be prepared for that. And like, we can't cry. There's no crying. You just have to pull yourself together and focus. Like, the economics are such that it makes sense. So a lot of the time I spend is like with money people. the money people. I'm like, money people, can you just get the money to go faster to the things that are actually clean? And that will actually help the transition. So I think, look, I think there's a lot of different ways, and that's why I talked about people, because in the end, it's about people, and I think we're just going to have to just be resilient, and we're going to have to think about innovative ways, whether it's, going with, the Pope and religious groups, the King. I'm Irish, so I like the King, but I don't know, he's really all in on climate action, just whatever it's going to take, and young people especially. Because, it's funny, because when I think about things, like, how do you get change? Like, do you know that for banks, the #1 customer is not the customer that's going to bring in the most money at the beginning? It's young people, because they're going to get every product with them. Well, imagine if young people are like, oh, you're investing in new fossil fuel infrastructure, no money, I'm not going to you, I'm going to go to this credit union. I mean, we need more banks that are doing this. It's going to have a huge impact. So I think we have to think about change in a very different way, and sometimes it's hard to do that, but there's loads of people who want climate action for a whole range of reasons. So I don't know, you just have to buckle up, and then, you just have to do it and see how do you reach people? But democracy is a real thing. Like, elections matter, so we're not Americans here. I don't know, maybe some Americans.
I'm going to ask you a related
Sure.
question, especially working on climate change. So, I mean, Donald Trump is one thing, but he doesn't happen in a vacuum. And when you look around the world and you see the dynamics around the world and the rise of, what look like very alarming politics, it's partly related to a loss of hope. For many, many people about their way of life, about their future. And I think one of the challenges with climate change and environmentalism is to find a way, and I could see you working on that, and you did a great job, to give people reason to hope at the same time that you're, sounding the alarm about what will happen if we don't. Any thoughts about that?
It's interesting, because I have a slide that I didn't use, I sometimes use for other things. It's swimming, I'm sorry. But I was like, okay, what does winning look like? Like, we have to just keep our eye on the ball. What does winning look like? It is cleaner air. It is cleaner water. It is more jobs. It is better equality, tackling inequality, because the people that are most impacted are the people that are also marginalized. It is all these things that we want. And so that, I think that's hopeful. I guess I sometimes am like, I get to these things, I'm like, okay, how do I motivate people? Because we also can't just say, it's all okay, it's all going to be fine. Obviously, the economics make sense. If we were rational people, we would do that, because we also are fighting entrenched interests and very challenging geopolitics. But things don't always go out, sometimes we think things are going to they're going to roll out in a particular way. So we had the illegal Russian invasion of Ukraine. So everyone was like, oh my gosh, it's going to be absolutely terrible for climate. Well, it actually accelerated the transition in Europe. Because once again, people are actually rational. Energy security is an issue. If you were relying on Russian gas, that is a bad thing. And guess what? We have cheaper solutions. We have wind and power. It's solar. Yes, okay, we're not going to be able to do all your base load on that, but that was a huge thing. So they have actually accelerated. So I think we can't also think that everything is going to be working out the exact same way. Got to take advantage. I'm always look for angles, look for opportunities, where can you go in? And so I think that's a good example. But yeah, the geopolitics is really tough. But there's loads of people working on climate actions, financial institutions, companies, provinces. A lot of provinces are leading the way, and that happened when the Harper government was going backwards. A lot of provinces led the way. So we do have to find the middle ground, and it's hard, because at the same time, we can't just keep on keeping on. Because while doomerism, I get in these conversations with environmentalists and regular folks, and they're like, you can't be a doomerist. And I was like, I totally 100% agree. But we can't also just think, our problem probably in Canada isn't most people are like, oh God, climate change is so terrible, we can't do anything, I can't get out of bed. Our problem in Canada is probably we don't actually realize how bad it is if we got to do something. So I think we got to find the middle ground, and I'm always trying to do it. But also, we need to scale action. Everything is about scale. And so if we could do one thing, if we could actually tackle fossil fuels, it's a fossil fuel climate crisis, we could actually get very, very far along the way and start actually seeing emissions going down.
I'm going to stop there, even though there are many reasons to carry on, but I know that lots of folks want to have a chance to chat with you, and I just want to thank you for all the incredible work you're doing and have done, and for what I sense is to come. So thank you so much. That was wonderful.
Thank you.